Jesus, I need you now!
This is firefighter Mark Williams, who walked through a wall of flames completely unharmed on June 18th, 2024. But what he saw in those flames changed everything.
Can you tell us how you managed to get through those flames unharmed? The fire chief says it should have been impossible.
I don't know how to explain this. I walked through flames that should have killed me. My gear should be melted. I should be in the burn unit right now, but look at me.
My name is Mark Williams. I'm 42 years old, and 8 months ago, footage of me declaring I saw Jesus in the fire went viral worldwide. I need to tell you something about who I was before that day, because I never thought I'd be one of those people with a miracle story. For 15 years, I'd been fighting fires with nothing but training, equipment, and experience. I was the guy who rolled his eyes when someone talked about divine intervention on the job. Don't get me wrong, I believed in God, but I kept my faith and my work in separate compartments. Growing up, my family never missed a Sunday service. My mother made sure of that. She'd wake us kids up every week, no matter how late we'd stayed up Saturday night, and march us down to First Baptist Church on Maple Street. I remember sitting in those wooden pews, listening to Pastor talk about miracles and wondering if God still did things like that in modern times. The stories seemed so distant, so ancient. Parting seas, healing the blind, walking on water. Those were Bible times, not 21st century America. When I became a firefighter, that practical mindset served me well. You don't run into burning buildings hoping for miracles. You rely on your gear, your training, and your team. My turnout coat, my helmet, my oxygen tank, these were the things that kept me alive. I'd seen too many good firefighters get hurt because they took unnecessary risks or trusted in luck instead of protocol. My wife always said I had two personalities. There was Sunday Mark, who sat in the front pew with her and our two kids, singing hymns and nodding along to sermons. Then there was Weekday Mark, the guy who showed up at Fire Station 19, ready to handle whatever emergency came through those doors. I thought that balance worked perfectly. God had his place, and my job had its place, and never the two should meet. Ask yourself this question, though. Have you ever felt like your faith was more habit than relationship? Because that's exactly where I was. I prayed before meals. I tithed every month. I even served on the church finance committee. But if I'm being completely honest, God felt more like a distant concept than a present reality. I believed he existed, sure, but I didn't expect him to show up in my daily life, especially not at work. Station 19 was my second home. I'd been there longer than almost anyone except Captain Rodriguez. The guys there knew me as reliable, steady, someone who followed procedures to the letter. I wasn't the most exciting firefighter on the crew, but I was the one you wanted backing you up in a dangerous situation. I knew every piece of equipment in that station, every protocol in our manual, every street in our district. My typical day started at 6 in the morning. Coffee first, always coffee, then equipment checks. Every morning, same routine. Test the oxygen tanks, inspect the hoses, check the ladder truck, review any maintenance reports from the previous shift. The other guys sometimes complained about my thoroughness, but I'd seen what happened when equipment failed. It wasn't pretty. The morning of June 18th started exactly like any other. I remember making coffee in the station kitchen, joking with Firefighter Johnson about his new mustache, listening to Firefighter Martinez complain about his wife's honey-do list. We had no idea that before the day was over, everything I thought I knew about God, about miracles, about the separation between faith and work, would be completely shattered. I'd responded to apartment fires before, dozens of them. They're dangerous, sure, but manageable if you follow protocol. You get your gear on, you work as a team, you trust your equipment, and you get everyone out safely. That's how it had always worked for me. 15 years, hundreds of calls, and I'd never once thought I needed anything more than good training and reliable equipment. Looking back now, I realize God was preparing me for something bigger than I could have imagined. But at the time, I was just a middle-aged firefighter who thought he had life figured out. I went to church on Sundays. I did my job during the week, and I kept those two worlds carefully separated. I had no idea that God was about to crash through those walls I'd built and show me that he's not content to stay in a Sunday morning box. My kids used to ask me if I ever got scared at work. I'd always tell them no, because I had the best equipment and training in the world. What I didn't tell them was that sometimes, late at night, when the station was quiet, I wondered what would happen if all that equipment and training wasn't enough. I'd push those thoughts away quickly, though. There was no point worrying about scenarios that would probably never happen. But June 18th wasn't probably never. June 18th was the day when all my carefully constructed walls between faith and work came crashing down, when I discovered that sometimes God doesn't just want a place in your life. Sometimes he wants to be your life, especially when everything else fails. I need you to understand something about the man I was that morning. I was confident, prepared, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. I thought I knew exactly what it meant to trust in God, but I had no idea what that actually looked like when your back was against the wall and every human solution had failed. That morning, putting on my gear for what I thought would be just another call, I had no way of knowing that before the sun set, I'd be standing in front of news cameras talking about walking through fire with Jesus Christ himself. The alarm started screaming at 2:47 in the afternoon. I remember looking at the clock on the station wall because I'd just finished cleaning my equipment and was thinking about grabbing a quick lunch. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speakers with that urgent tone that makes every firefighter's stomach tighten. Structure fire. Multiple occupants trapped. 1247 Riverside Apartments. All units respond immediately. I was suited up and on the truck in less than 3 minutes. That's what 15 years of training does for you. Your body moves on autopilot while your mind starts processing what you might be walking into. Riverside Apartments was a 4-story complex, older building, wood frame construction, the kind of place that burns fast and hot. Captain Rodriguez was already barking orders over the radio, coordinating with the other units responding to the scene. When we turned the corner onto Riverside Street, I saw the smoke first. Thick, black columns rising into the afternoon sky, visible from 6 blocks away. Then we saw the flames. The entire second floor was already engulfed, and fire was climbing toward the 3rd and 4th floors like it was racing up a ladder. People were hanging out of windows, screaming for help, some holding children. The scene was chaos. Police had cordoned off the area, but residents who'd escaped were running around frantically, some of them barefoot and still in their pajamas. A woman was screaming about her cat still being inside. An elderly man sat on the curb, oxygen mask over his face, paramedics checking him for smoke inhalation. This was bad. Worse than the usual apartment fires we handled. Captain Rodriguez immediately started setting up command. Johnson, Martinez, take the ladder truck. Start evacuations from the east side. Williams, Thompson, you're with me. We're going in through the main entrance to clear the stairwells. Standard procedure. Get the ladder crews working the outside evacuations, while interior teams work floor by floor to make sure everyone gets out safely. I checked my equipment one more time. Oxygen tank showing full pressure, radio working, axe secured, flashlight functioning. Everything exactly as it should be. Thompson gave me a thumbs up, indicating his gear was ready too. We followed Captain Rodriguez toward the main entrance, moving through smoke that was already thick enough to sting your eyes even through our face masks. The lobby was like walking into hell. The temperature had to be over 200 degrees, and visibility was down to maybe 10 feet. We could hear people screaming from the upper floors, but the elevator was obviously out of service. The stairwell was our only option. Captain Rodriguez took point. I was second, Thompson bringing up the rear. We started climbing. The second floor was completely gone. Flames had consumed everything, making it impossible to even enter the hallway. We pushed up to the 3rd floor, where we found 2 families who'd been trapped by smoke in their apartments. Standard rescue operation. We got them moving down the stairs towards safety, then continued up to check the 4th floor. That's where everything went wrong. We'd just reached the 4th floor landing when we heard this grinding, cracking sound that every firefighter knows means trouble. Structural failure. The stairwell below us, the one we'd just climbed and sent those families down, was compromising. Captain Rodriguez grabbed his radio to warn the teams below, but before he could speak, we heard the crash. The entire stairwell from the 3rd floor down had collapsed, just gone. Tons of burning debris now blocked what had been our only way out. Worse, we could hear screaming from apartment 4C. A mother and what sounded like 2 children, trapped and running out of time. Thompson started looking for alternative exits, but the windows on this floor were too high for our ladder trucks to reach. The fire escape had been consumed by flames. Captain Rodriguez was on his radio, calling for additional equipment, but we all knew it would take too long. The building structure was failing fast, and those people in 4C had maybe minutes before the floor gave out. That's when I felt my oxygen alarm start beeping. Every firefighter's worst nightmare. I checked the gauge and felt my heart sink. Malfunction. The tank was showing empty when it should have been 3/4 full. Equipment failure. The one thing I'd always trusted never to happen when I needed it most. I told Captain Rodriguez about my tank. His face went grim behind his mask. Without a working oxygen supply, I couldn't stay in this environment. The smoke and toxic gases would overcome me in minutes. Standard protocol was clear. I needed to evacuate immediately. But those screams from apartment 4C were getting more desperate. The mother was at the window now, holding her children, begging for someone to help them. The only way to reach them was through the hallway, which was now a tunnel of flames. Even with full protective gear and working oxygen, it would be extremely dangerous. Without respiratory protection, it would be suicide. Have you ever been in a situation where every logical choice leads to someone dying? Because that's exactly where I found myself. I could follow protocol, evacuate due to equipment failure, and watch that family burn to death. Or I could attempt an impossible rescue and probably die trying. Captain Rodriguez ordered me out. "Williams, you're compromised. Get to the window. We'll get a ladder to you." But as I looked toward apartment 4C, seeing that mother holding her babies, something inside me rebelled against walking away. The smoke was getting thicker. The building was shaking as more structural elements failed. Time was running out for everyone, but especially for that trapped family. My training said, leave. My equipment said leave. Every rational thought in my head said leave. But I couldn't. I physically could not walk away from those people. Standing there in that smoke-filled hallway, with my oxygen tank dead and flames blocking the only path to that trapped family, I came face to face with the absolute limits of human ability. Everything I'd relied on for 15 years had failed me. My equipment was broken. My training had no answer for this scenario. My experience meant nothing when faced with an impossible situation. The screaming from apartment 4C was getting more desperate by the second. I could hear the mother crying, "Please, somebody help us. My babies, please." Her voice cut through all the noise of the fire, through the sound of my own heart pounding, through Captain Rodriguez shouting orders into his radio. It was the sound of a human being facing death and begging for a miracle. I looked down that hallway toward their apartment. It wasn't just on fire. It was a tunnel of flames. The ceiling was burning. The walls were burning. Even the floor was starting to buckle from the heat. The temperature in there had to be over 1,000 degrees. Without working respiratory equipment, I'd have maybe 30 seconds before the superheated gases seared my lungs and killed me. Captain Rodriguez grabbed my shoulder. "Williams, That's an order. Get to the window now. He was right. Every protocol we'd ever learned said I needed to evacuate immediately. You don't send compromised firefighters into certain death. It goes against everything we're trained to do. But those protocols assumed there would be another way to save the people we're trying to rescue. There wasn't another way. The ladder trucks couldn't reach the 4th floor on this side of the building. The fire escape was gone. The stairwell was blocked. If those people were going to live, someone had to walk through that wall of fire to get them. And I was the only one in position to try. I want you to understand something about that moment. This wasn't heroic bravery. This wasn't some action movie scene where the hero charges in without fear. I was absolutely terrified. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my axe. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to follow orders and get out of there. But sometimes terror and faith occupy the same space. Sometimes being afraid is exactly when you discover what you really believe about God. Because when you're staring at an impossible situation, when every human solution has failed, when death is staring you in the face, that's when you find out whether your faith is real or just Sunday morning pretending. I dropped to my knees right there in that burning hallway. Captain Rodriguez probably thought the smoke was getting to me, but I wasn't overcome. I was surrendering. For the first time in my adult life, I was admitting that Mark Williams, veteran firefighter with all his training and experience, couldn't handle what was in front of him. Jesus, I prayed, and my voice was barely a whisper under my broken respirator mask. I can't do this alone. I've never needed you like this before. I've always had my equipment, my training, my protocols. But none of that works now. If you want me to save that family, you're going to have to do it through me. Because I can't survive walking through that fire. The prayer wasn't eloquent. It wasn't the kind of prayer they teach you in church. It was desperate, raw, completely honest. I was a man who had reached the absolute end of himself, crying out to God because there was literally nowhere else to turn. As I knelt there, something shifted inside me. I can't explain it in any way that makes logical sense. The fear didn't disappear, but something stronger than fear began rising up. It felt like courage, but not the kind that comes from confidence in your own abilities. This was different. This was the kind of courage that comes from knowing you're not alone. You've probably never been in a burning building, but maybe you've been in your own impossible situation. Maybe you faced something that was bigger than your abilities. Your resources, your strength. If you have, then you know what I'm talking about. There's a moment when you realize that your only choice is to trust God completely, or give up entirely. I stood up and looked at Captain Rodriguez. Those people are going to die if someone doesn't go in there right now. He shook his head, pointing toward the window where other firefighters were trying to position a ladder. Williams, you'll die if you go in there without oxygen. Maybe, I said, and I surprised myself with how calm my voice sounded. But maybe God has other plans. I started walking toward that hallway of flames. Each step felt like stepping off a cliff, but each step also felt like the most important thing I'd ever done. The heat was already intense, just approaching the entrance to the hallway. I could feel it through my protective gear, could see the air shimmering with temperature that would kill me in seconds. Captain Rodriguez was shouting something behind me, probably ordering me to stop, but I couldn't hear him clearly over the roar of the flames. All I could hear was that mother's voice crying for help and something else. Something quieter, but stronger. It sounded almost like someone saying, "I am with you." I paused at the entrance to that tunnel of fire. This was it. The moment where faith either becomes real or reveals itself as wishful thinking. The moment where you either trust God completely or admit you never really trusted Him at all. The flames were reaching toward me like living things, hungry and angry. The heat was already making it hard to breathe through my damaged equipment. Logic said I would die before taking 10 steps into that inferno. But faith said something different. Faith said step forward, so I did. I stepped into that wall of flames expecting to die. The first step should have been my last. The temperature in that hallway was hot enough to melt steel, hot enough to kill a person in seconds. But something impossible happened the moment my boot crossed into that inferno. The flames parted. I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking right now, because it's exactly what I would have thought if someone had told me this story 8 months ago. But I'm telling you what I experienced with my own eyes, what I felt with my own body. The fire didn't just move away from me. It created a path, like someone had taken a giant invisible hand and pushed the flames to either side. Where there should have been 1,000-degree heat searing my lungs, there was breathable air. Where there should have been flames consuming my protective gear, there was a clear corridor just wide enough for me to walk through. The fire was still raging on both sides of me, close enough that I could have reached out and touched it, but it wasn't touching me. That's when I saw him. Jesus was walking beside me through those flames. Not a vision, not a dream, not some oxygen-deprived hallucination. He was there, as real as the fire around us, as real as the floor beneath my feet. He was exactly like I'd imagined him growing up in Sunday school, but also completely different. Taller than I expected, with eyes that seemed to contain everything you'd ever need to know about love and strength and peace all at once. He was wearing simple clothes, nothing fancy, but they were somehow brighter than the flames surrounding us. His presence filled that burning hallway with a peace I'd never experienced before. The same hallway that should have been my death trap had become the safest place I'd ever been, because he was there with me. "Do not be afraid," he said, and his voice was quieter than a whisper, but somehow clearer than anything I'd ever heard. "I am with you always, my child. I have been waiting for this moment, when you would finally need me more than you need anything else." I tried to speak, tried to tell him how sorry I was for keeping him locked away in Sunday mornings, for thinking I could handle life without really depending on him. But no words came out. Maybe because in his presence, he already knew everything I wanted to say. Maybe because some moments are too big for words. We walked together through that impossible corridor of safety. The flames on either side of us were roaring, consuming everything they touched, but they created a perfect path for us. I could feel the heat, but it didn't burn. I could see the fire, but it couldn't reach me. Every step we took together was a step deeper into the supernatural, deeper into a reality where God's power trumps every law of physics. "Why now?" I finally managed to ask. "Why are you here now?" "I have always been here," he replied. "You just needed a fire big enough to make you look for me." Have you ever heard a truth so simple it changes everything you thought you knew about your life? Because that's what happened to me in that moment. I realized that every easy day, every routine call, every time my equipment worked perfectly and my training was enough, those were the times I'd been living like God didn't matter. It took an impossible situation to show me how much I needed him in every situation. We reached apartment 4C, and I could hear the family inside, coughing from smoke inhalation, the mother still calling for help in a voice that was getting weaker. I tried the door handle, and it was locked. Standard procedure would be to use my axe to break it down, but I looked at Jesus, and he simply nodded toward the door. "Open," he said, not to me, but to the door itself. The lock clicked, and the door swung open on its own. Inside, I found them huddled in the bathroom, the only room where the smoke wasn't completely overwhelming. A mother in her 30s, tears streaming down her face, holding 2 children, a boy about 8, and a girl maybe 5 years old. They looked up at me like I was their last hope on earth. "It's okay," I told them, and I was amazed at how calm my voice sounded. "I'm here to get you out. We're going to walk through the fire, but you're going to be safe. I promise." The mother stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Through the fire? We can't walk through that. We'll die." I looked back toward the hallway where Jesus was waiting for us, still maintaining that impossible safe passage through the flames. "Trust me," I said. "Someone very important is going to walk with us." I helped them to their feet. The little girl was crying. The boy was trying to be brave, but I could see the terror in his eyes. The mother was shaking so badly she could barely stand. They had no reason to trust me. No reason to believe we could survive walking into that inferno. But sometimes faith means following someone into the impossible, even when you can't see what they see. I led them to the doorway of that burning hallway. When they saw the path of safety that had been created for us, when they saw the flames parted like curtains on either side of a clear walkway, the mother gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. "How is this possible?" she whispered. I looked at Jesus, still walking beside us, still maintaining our safe passage with his presence. "Because God still does miracles," I told her, "and today, he's doing one for us." We walked through that fire together, all four of us, led by Jesus Christ himself, through flames that should have killed us all. The moment we emerged from that burning building, everything changed. The mother and her children collapsed onto the grass, coughing and crying, but alive. Paramedics rushed over to check them for injuries, while I stood there in complete shock, trying to process what had just happened. The flames were still raging behind us. The hallway we just walked through was completely consumed, yet here we were, all of us breathing, all of us unburned. Captain Rodriguez was the first to reach me. His face was white as a sheet behind his soot-stained mask. "Williams, how did you get them out? That hallway was completely engulfed. We saw you go in, then we lost visual contact. The thermal cameras showed solid fire wall to wall." I opened my mouth to answer, but what could I say? That Jesus Christ had walked through the flames with us? That the fire had parted like the Red Sea? Even saying it in my own head sounded impossible. But I looked down at myself, at my turnout gear that should have been melted, at my hands that should have been burned, at the family we'd just rescued, who should have been dead. Paramedic Johnson was examining me with a confused expression. "Mark, I need to get you to the hospital. You were in there without working respiratory equipment for at least 10 minutes. You should have severe smoke inhalation at minimum." He was checking my pulse, looking at my eyes with a flashlight, listening to my lungs with a stethoscope. "I'm fine," I kept telling him, but he wasn't listening. None of them were listening, because what I was telling them didn't make medical sense. 10 minutes in that environment without proper breathing equipment should have killed me. The superheated gases alone should have seared my lungs beyond repair. They loaded me into an ambulance anyway, despite my protests. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez ran every test she could think of. Chest x-rays, blood work, lung function tests, even a CT scan. She kept shaking her head and ordering more tests. Finally, she came into my room with a chart in her hands and the most puzzled expression I'd ever seen on a medical professional. "Mark, I don't understand these results," she said. "According to your exposure time and the temperature readings from that fire, you should be in intensive care right now, but your lungs are completely clear. No smoke damage, no irritation, nothing. It's like you were never in that fire at all." That's when news reporter Sarah Chen arrived at the hospital. Someone had tipped off the local news about the rescue, and she wanted to interview the firefighter who'd saved a family from an impossible situation. I almost refused to talk to her. How do you explain a miracle to a news reporter? How do you tell someone about seeing Jesus without sounding like you've lost your mind? But sitting in that hospital bed, looking at the test results that proved something supernatural had happened, I realized I had a choice. I could make up some story about finding a safe route through the fire, about lucky breaks and good timing. Or I could tell the truth, regardless of how it sounded to other people. She set up her camera in my hospital room and started with standard questions. How did you manage to rescue that family when other firefighters said it was impossible? What went through your mind when your equipment failed? Do you consider yourself a hero? I answered the basic questions about the fire, about my equipment failing, about hearing the family trapped in apartment 4C. But when she asked me how I actually got them out, I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change my life forever. I saw Jesus, I said, looking directly into that camera. My oxygen tank failed. The hallway was completely engulfed in flames, and every human method of rescue had been exhausted. So I prayed, and Jesus Christ appeared and walked through that fire with me. The flames parted around us, and he led us all to safety. The reporter's expression shifted from professional interest to barely concealed skepticism. You're saying you had a religious experience during this rescue? I'm saying Jesus Christ was physically present in that hallway. He spoke to me, he walked beside me, and he made a way through flames that should have killed us all. This wasn't a religious experience. This was God performing a miracle to save 4 lives. I watched her face as she tried to decide whether to treat this as a human interest story or evidence of post-traumatic stress. But I didn't care what she thought. I'd been given a choice between protecting my reputation and honoring the God who had just saved 5 lives through the impossible. And the choice was easy. So you're telling our viewers that God still performs miracles like the ones we read about in the Bible. I'm telling your viewers that the same God who protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace protected me and that family today. I'm telling them that when you reach the end of your own strength and cry out to Jesus, he's still there. He's still listening, and he's still in the miracle business. That interview aired on the evening news, and by the next morning, the video had been shared thousands of times online. Within a week, it had gone viral worldwide. People were calling the hospital, the fire department, even showing up at my house, wanting to hear more about what had happened. The reactions were exactly what you'd expect. Some people called me a hero. Others called me delusional. Some said I was a publicity seeker, making up stories to get attention. Fellow firefighters were split down the middle. Some believed something supernatural had happened. Others thought the stress and smoke had affected my judgment. But none of the criticism mattered, because I knew what I'd experienced. More importantly, so did that mother and her 2 children. 8 months later, my life looks nothing like it did before June 18th. I'm still a firefighter at Station 19, but everything about how I approach my job has changed. Every call we respond to, every emergency we face, I go in knowing that the same God who walked through flames with me is still present, still protecting, still performing miracles when we need them most. The viral video changed everything. Within days of that interview airing, I was getting calls from churches across the country asking me to share my testimony. At first, I was hesitant. I'd never been a public speaker. Never considered myself the kind of person who travels around telling God stories. But my wife reminded me of something that put it all in perspective. "Mark," she said one evening as we sat in our living room, still getting dozens of emails from people who'd seen the video. "What if God didn't save you and that family just so you could go back to normal life? What if he has something bigger in mind?" She was right, of course. You don't walk through fire with Jesus Christ and then pretend it never happened. You don't experience a miracle that impossible and then keep it to yourself. So I started accepting speaking invitations, first at our own church, then at churches in neighboring towns, eventually traveling across state lines to share what God had done. The first time I stood in front of a congregation to tell my story, I was more nervous than I'd ever been running into a burning building. But when I got to the part about Jesus appearing in that hallway, when I described how the flames parted and he walked with us to safety. I watched faces in that audience transform. People were crying. Some were raising their hands in praise. Others were nodding like they'd been waiting their whole lives to hear that God still does the impossible. After that first speaking engagement, a pastor approached me with tears in his eyes. "Brother Mark," he said, "I've been preaching about miracles for 30 years, but I've never seen one myself. Thank you for reminding us that our God is still the same yesterday, today, and forever." That's when I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. This was God using my experience to strengthen other people's faith, to remind them that the miraculous isn't limited to Bible times. Every time I share this testimony, I see hope return to faces that had given up believing God still intervenes in human affairs. My children have watched their father transform from someone who kept faith and work in separate categories to someone who understands that God wants to be involved in every aspect of our lives. My daughter, who's 16 now, told me recently that seeing my boldness in sharing this testimony gave her courage to pray for her friends at school. My son, who's 18, said the miracle made him realize he wants to serve God with the same kind of complete surrender I had to learn that day in the fire. But the speaking engagements are just part of how life has changed. Back at the fire station, I approach every call differently now. Before June 18th, I trusted in equipment and training. Now I still use proper equipment and follow protocols, but I also pray before every rescue, asking God to guide us and protect the people we're trying to save. Last month, we responded to a car accident where a woman was trapped in her vehicle with a gas leak, threatening to cause an explosion. The situation was similar to the apartment fire, impossible circumstances requiring a miracle. As I approached her car, I prayed the same prayer I'd prayed in that burning hallway. "Jesus, I can't do this alone. I need you to make a way." The woman walked away from that accident completely uninjured, when by all medical logic she should have been severely hurt. The gas leak stopped just long enough for us to extract her safely. My fellow firefighters called it lucky timing. I knew better. I'd seen God work this way before. Ask yourself this question. If Jesus Christ appeared to you in your most desperate moment, if he performed an undeniable miracle in your life, what would you do with that experience? Would you keep it quiet to protect your reputation? Or would you tell everyone who would listen about the God who still does the impossible? I chose to tell everyone, and it's cost me some relationships, but given me so many more. Some firefighters think I've become a religious fanatic. Some friends from the old days don't know how to relate to me anymore. But the emails I receive from people whose faith has been strengthened by my testimony, the conversations I've had with people who've rededicated their lives to Christ after hearing my story, these things matter more than the criticism. The mother and her children still attend every speaking engagement within driving distance of their home. They've become part of my testimony, living proof that what happened in that fire was real. When skeptics question my story, when people suggest I made it up for attention, these three people stand up and say, "We were there. We walked through that fire with him. We experienced the miracle too." 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from a soldier deployed overseas. He wrote that he'd been struggling with his faith, wondering if God cared about the danger he faced every day. Then, someone showed him my video. He said, knowing that Jesus still walks with people through fire gave him peace about his deployment and courage to share his faith with his fellow soldiers. That letter reminded me why God allowed me to experience something so impossible it would sound unbelievable to most people. It wasn't for my benefit alone. It was so that everyone who hears this testimony would be reminded that we serve a God for whom nothing is impossible. I'm asking you the same question that news reporter Sarah Chen asked me in that hospital room. Do you believe God still performs miracles like the ones we read about in the Bible? Because I'm here to tell you that he absolutely does. The same God who parted the Red Sea parted flames for me. The same God who protected Daniel's friends in Nebuchadnezzar's furnace protected me and that family. He's still the God of miracles, and he's still looking for people desperate enough to cry out to him when human solutions fail. When you walk with Jesus, even fire cannot harm you.